So we're getting ready now to start preparing our sample bin, and just to see how these colours work out, and to see, you know, what proportions of the colours, whether I like how it exhibits itself in the yarn. So I have taken my large batt weights and I've divided that by 4. And so now I have these amounts of each colour. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare these fibres to go onto the drum carder. Now that might seem a bit strange because we always tend to think that drum carding is the preparation of the fibres, but I have become such a big believer in steaming. And so this is my steamer, and I'm just going to hold my fibre in front of the steamer and allow the steam to pass through the fibre, and particularly with wool top that has been processed under heat. This is going to reactivate the crimp. So the wiggling is very important actually. It just allows the fibre to move past each other and open up. You can see as soon as I start wiggling it in the steam, it starts to open up here. There we go. So that's my first piece. You can see how much that's opened up. Here's my second piece. And what we're doing really is pre-preparing the fibre to go on the carder, which will also prepare the fibre ready to be spun. But this is just going to give this one a good wiggle. There we go, it's starting to open up. Activates the crimp. You might actually want to point it a little bit away from your carder, considering the carder's made out of timber. There we go. And even with the carded batt, oh, there's a little bit more grey there. Need to be consistent in my weights. If you haven't got one of these steamers, this will work just as well with a shot of steam iron. And you will have seen me preparing wool top this way in one of my other videos. But you might not have seen me preparing fibre to go onto a carder by steaming. I can just feel now that this batt has opened up. There is volume there, there is lightness, in as much as the steam has opened up the fibres and created space between the fibres. I will also do it with the silk, which sounds a bit strange, but it does open up your silk, and just a shot of steam will just make it less compact. Doesn't have to be a long time, and the wiggling is essential, not just as an effect. There we go, we can turn that off now. So we've pre-prepared our fibre to go on. Now we always start off with a wool layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do 2 layers of each colour. So I'll start off with approximately half my brown wool as my first layer, and I'm just going to place that as a strip onto the middle of the carder. So I've activated the packing brush at the back, and now I'm just going to put my first layer of the main colour. And notice the speed at which that I'm rotating the drum. We don't need to go fast, and if I'm going to adjust the fibre, I will stop rotating. And we're just allowing that fibre to transfer onto the drum there. It's nicely opened up. And there was just this last little bit. And each bit is important because we're dealing in weight here. Okay, so the next colour, well, in actual fact, what I like to do is to put a little tiny dressing of silk in between each layer. I just draft the silk on to the surface of the drum, looking and seeing that that's a little bit naked there. We'll put it on there, and we'll just allow the drum to pull it out of our fingers as if it was drafting it out. So there we go, there's our first layer prepared. Now we're going to do half of the orange. So we'll break that in half. That's nicely opened up by the steaming. Now I could put it through, in fact I will. And what I'll do is, because it's a narrow strip, I'll start at one side. It's being taken in now. What I'll do is I'll just shunt it across on an angle until, and see how it's coming out on this side where it was originally. And I'll shunt it across on an angle, and there we go. It's starting to come across and fill up the width of the strip. And this little bit will be taken up very soon. We can always encourage it if we want to. So there's our next layer, and we'll put a nice little dressing of silk in between that. There we go. And now we're going to do half of the grey. I'll just break that in half. And we'll give myself half of this. I'm being quite, I mean, obviously not weighing this time, but I'm making sure that I've got a method that I can follow each time. Put the grey on. That was wide enough to cover the strip, so I didn't have to angle it. And I can get some of the silk ready to just dress it. It's like dressing a salad. A little bit on each of the layers. There we go. And now the next layer would be the brown again. So we would then continue on and do the next layer, and that would be our sample spin. So this is the sample. I've just taken it off the carder, and of course I want to ply my wool for this particular jumper. So I will be then splitting my sample in two. Now you can see the colours that are coming out. And I will then spin. And we need to make decisions about the method that I'm going to spin for. But that's my sample, and that will spin up fairly quickly, and it is so well worth doing to actually spin this and write down your findings. You might well find that you know your first sample spin is not what you want to do, or it doesn't achieve the end results that you want, and so you'll make adjustments. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how much fiber and the samples that you will get from your spinning, and what the next process is. Okay, so with the magic of pre-preparing, I have a skein of yarn that I spun. The very first time that I did this, I was just so gung-ho. I decided I would spin a whole batt in this colour combination, and here it is. I really packed it down. It came off this carder. And the yarn that I got, that I spun, was what I considered to be a 10-ply yarn, okay? So I checked the wraps per inch on my little tool that I've got, that lots of you spinners have got, and it worked out to be approximately a 10-ply yarn. And so for this next pattern that I'm looking at, they did use what they term as a worsted or an Aran weight yarn. And I thought, right, hey, I've just hit the brief. And then I was reminded of my my lesson in the jumper that we were talking about earlier, and I thought I really better weigh this skein and count the meterage. And this is where referring back to a commercial yarn is quite informative, because they provide that band that goes around the commercial yarn, and there's really good solid information, especially if the pattern that you're using is referring to a specific type of yarn. So I tend to use the Cascade 220 as a reference for this particular case, because it is also a worsted weight yarn, and it has on the band it gives you 200 meters for 100 grams. Now my particular jumper that I'm looking at needs 1200 meters. I mean, approximately. I might need less because I want it to be slightly shorter, but that's what I'm working on at the moment. And so I would need 6 skeins to get that. Okay, but when I weighed this particular skein of yarn, it was going to be far heavier. It was almost going to be double the weight. So I thought to myself, well, how do I make my yarn just as thick but make it lighter? And we do know that woolen spinning, the woolen method of spinning and drafting can make your yarns lighter, but I wanted the smoothness of the worsted because there is a stitch pattern in this particular jumper that I wanted to show up. So I had to readjust, and we will be making a shorter video where I am sat at the spinning wheel and I will show you the techniques that I use to get a lighter and yet just as thick yarn. So the next skein that I produced was this one. It's actually been split in two, but was almost a third lighter than that, and yet was still working out to be a worsted weight yarn, a 10-ply yarn. So that was a huge success. I've got the lightness, I've got the thickness in my yarn, and I'm more in keeping, not quite as light as a commercial yarn, but more in keeping, and yet I've got the resilience of the worsted on the outside. Okay, so I've taken my lighter weight yarn and I've knitted it into a swatch here on the 5mm needles that the pattern suggested, and my stitch amount was actually, there was too many stitches for the gauge. Also, what I noticed is that this particular size of needle for this thickness of yarn on this style of yarn actually muted the colors. Now, it's not unpleasant, but do see the difference, if you can see that difference, of when I went up to a 5.5mm needle, how the colors popped a bit more and opened up a bit more. So it was just quite a revolution to me to realize that I can make adjustments to the colors just by the needle size to how the colors presented themselves. And then just because I was in a swatchy sort of mood, I did a larger swatch and tested also the rib on that. And I'm really happy with the way that the color is not pooling too much. I mean, we do have an odd little, highlight of the chocolate brown there, but I didn't mind that at all. And so the concept of the weight of the fiber and the application on the carder in splitting up the layers and putting the silk in between is something that I'm really satisfied with. But what if I took out the chocolate brown and put in more of a creamy color, a creamy white color? What would that do? We'll have a look at this. So this is the swatch that I achieved just by removing the chocolate brown. Here's the yarn, just by removing the chocolate brown and replacing that portion of the batt with more of a creamy white fibre. It really is, so you still get that lovely flickering of colour. You don't get any pooling. You get the odd little stripe here and there, but nothing that's going to show up differently in the circumference of a sleeve compared to the circumference of a body. And it makes just a big difference from the other swatch that we had. But what came to mind in doing this was, you know, those lovely gradient shawls. Well, you can actually achieve this by just swapping out one colour. So in this case, as we've already discussed, I took out the chocolate brown, but maybe the first part of your shawl would be with this combination, and maybe the next part of your shawl would be in this combination. Now then maybe you could really start to think about taking out the white and adding a colour, maybe a complementary opposite, more of the purple that is truly coming out in this one. You could make your next section of your shawl by adding fibre that is purple in colour and see the progression. Each yarn would be married to the other because there's components the same, a bit like a family member, having familiar looks. And then you'd be really clear and confident that your yarns were going to marry together for one garment. Okay, so we've talked about tweedy type yarns, but what if you're looking for more of a solid colour? Remember when those lovely braids came out, and because they were hand dyed, we tended to call them semi-solids. The reason why they were so appealing, and even when knitted up or woven were really appealing, is that when a colour is made up of many colours or varying degrees of value of that colour, then what happens is that your eyes flicker across it. And when your eyes are caused to flicker because there are different components to the one thing, it creates excitement in your brain. And so you're more attracted to that item than if it was just a plain commercially dyed colour. So this is an illustration of that. Using my colour card again, what I did was I had some smaller amounts of fibres in these colours, and I wanted to make a sort of a blue style yarn. And so what I did was I took these colours and found them basically on my colour card. Here we go, more in this section, as you can see now. More in the blue section, actually. Here we go. There we go. So that's more representative. We might move up slightly darker. There we go. So there is the colours that I've represented there. And I popped this one in as well, which basically is a little stronger, but I was going to smooth it out. And there you can see how those colours are represented in this square, in these 9 circles. So it's very interesting to build up a colour by actually carding lots of colours together. And so what I did was, once again, I basically steamed my fibre. I'm becoming quite a fan of steaming my fibre before I card it. It tends to actually cut down on the processing time. So where I might have to put this back through 3 times, because I've steamed these fibres and they were all wool top, because they've opened up, I only had to put this back through twice, and it's still very open and very draftable. So here are the colours, and basically what I did was just do fine layers of these different colours to blend together. And Ivy just commented on the fact that the yarn seems so much more darker than the batt itself. Well, in actual fact, the batt looks lighter than the colours that it's made up of. And so this is what happens when you sort of spread colour out and you mix it together. But of course, spinning is like condensing and bringing the colours together, because we're twisting them and compacting them together. So you will get a slightly darker effect once you spin. And this was the yarn that I got out. I spun it in this method that I'm going to show you. So it's light and spongy. And I first of all then did the 5mm needle, and as you can see, it's a little bit more muted. Then when I went to the 5.5, I get a slightly brighter look. So you don't have to think in different colours. You can think about the same colour but in different values, and get a blue colour yarn or the colour of your choice.